Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I was lying in bed with my headphones on, half lost in the soft hum of music, the glow from the bedside lamp painting the room in warm amber. My thoughts drifted between the lyrics and the faint creak of the house settling for the night, when suddenly I felt it, his hand slipping under the blanket. My breath caught. It wasn't a startling touch, but the kind of quiet, deliberate movement that said more than words ever could. My heartbeat quickened, pulsing louder than the song in my ears. I pulled one headphone back, unsure if I should pretend not to notice, or meet the moment head-on. When I turned, his eyes were already on me. Dark, steady, and filled with a playful glint, as though he knew exactly what he was doing. The silence between us became its own language. No words, just the thrum of anticipation. "Comfortable?" he asked lightly, his voice low, teasing, with that subtle edge that always made me melt. I tried to keep my composure, but the warmth of his palm lingered beneath the blanket, close enough to make me hyper-aware of every shift, every inch of space between us. The lamp's glow traced the sharp line of his jaw, the curve of his smile, and in that moment I could feel the magnetic pull, the way my body leaned toward his before I even realized it. I bit back a smile, refusing to give him the satisfaction of knowing how easily he unraveled me. Yet he already knew. He always did. The tension thickened, the music fading into background noise I no longer cared to hear. His hands stilled, as though waiting for me to decide whether to move away or to give in to the closeness neither of us could ignore. My lips parted to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. All I managed was a shaky exhale, which only made his smile deepen. His gaze held mine, steady and unblinking, as though the entire world had narrowed down to just this bed, this touch, this breathless pause before whatever came next. And then, just when I thought he would close the space between us, he stopped. Leaving me caught between relief and frustration, my pulse still racing, my body still leaning toward him. What was he waiting for? What was about to happen? The answer lingered in the air, just out of reach. The lamp still glowed softly in the corner, but the silence between us began to stretch, too heavy, too meaningful to ignore. His hand had withdrawn under the blanket, leaving behind a warmth that lingered against my skin. I should have been relieved, but instead, I felt an ache, a quiet frustration. Because it wasn't just about his touch, it was about everything we hadn't said in months. We used to be effortless. Laughter over late-night snacks, whispered secrets in the dark, brushing fingers across the kitchen counter when no one was looking. Somewhere between bills, deadlines, and unspoken resentments, we lost that rhythm. Now, every touch felt like a question, every silence like an answer neither of us dared to say out loud. I turned my head slightly, catching his eyes again. There it was, the same pull, the same fire, but layered now with something else. Guilt? Longing? Maybe both. He was looking at me as though I was both familiar and distant, as though he remembered the woman he married but wasn't sure if she was still here. "You've been far away lately," I whispered, surprising even myself. The words slipped out, heavy but tender, like I had been waiting for this moment without realizing it. He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice quiet. "And you haven't noticed that I've been reaching for you?" The words lodged in my chest. My heart pounded, and suddenly I wasn't just nervous about his hand under the blanket, I was nervous about the truth we'd been dodging. My fingers curled against the sheet, torn between retreating into the safety of silence or leaning into the risk of honesty. He reached up, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. The touch was light, almost reverent. For a second, I closed my eyes, letting myself remember how it used to feel, when every touch meant everything, when we couldn't go a day without finding excuses to hold each other. But now? Now it felt fragile, like glass we both wanted to hold but were afraid to shatter. My voice trembled as I answered, "I notice. I just don't always know what to do with it." His smile was faint, tinged with something deeper than playfulness. "Then let me remind you. The air thickened, not with the promise of a kiss, but with the weight of every unsaid word, every desire buried under the routine of marriage. His hand hovered near mine on the sheet, not touching, but close enough that the warmth traveled between us. That closeness was louder than any embrace. We stayed like that, teetering on the edge between distance and closeness, silence and confession, until the room itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, he shifted, his body leaning in just enough to make me wonder if he was finally about to close the gap. But he stopped again, leaving me trembling with the question, would this night bring us back together, or remind us how far apart we drifted? The air between us was thick, almost suffocating, as if every unspoken thought had been trapped in this room, waiting for the right moment to erupt. His hand lingered close, and I felt the weight of his presence press against me more than the blanket ever could. But behind his steady gaze, I sensed something sharper than tenderness. A hint of jealousy. A quiet storm. "You've been smiling at your phone a lot lately," he murmured, his tone soft but edged, like a knife wrapped in silk. The words jolted me. I hadn't expected him to notice, let alone bring it up now, here, in this fragile moment. Heat rushed to my cheeks. Yes, there had been messages. A harmless exchange with an old friend, I told myself. But maybe not so harmless if he was reading it in my silence. I opened my mouth, but the explanation tangled in my throat. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my skin, his eyes unyielding. Should I be worried? His question wasn't really a question, it was a confession of his own fear. A sign that the man who so often held himself together was unraveling in front of me. And strangely, instead of pushing me away, it pulled me closer. Because the truth was, I had been craving attention. Not because I didn't love him, but because I missed the way he used to look at me, as if I were the only thing in the room. And now, here he was, looking at me that way again. My heartbeat thundered. My lips trembled between an answer and silence. I wanted to soothe his doubts, to tell him he was the only one. But another part of me, the reckless part, thrilled at the idea that he was jealous, that he cared enough to burn. He reached out suddenly, his fingers brushing mine, firm this time, claiming space he had hesitated to take before. His jaw tightened, and his voice dropped lower. "I don't like the thought of someone else making you smile the way I should." The intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. For the first time in months, he wasn't distant. He was fierce. Present. And it left me trembling, caught between fear and desire. I met his stare, unable to pull away. The silence grew dangerous, charged with the possibility that tonight might tip us over an edge we couldn't step back from. The night deepened, the house wrapped in silence, as if the world itself conspired to leave us alone in this moment. The blanket was no longer just fabric, it felt like a cage, trapping heat, breath, and the weight of emotions we had both been holding back. He shifted closer, the mattress dipping beneath his weight, bringing his face so near I could feel the whisper of his breath against my cheek. My pulse raced, every beat echoing in my ears. There was nowhere left to hide, no excuse to retreat. His hand found mine under the blanket, not tentative this time, but sure, fingers intertwining as though daring me to pull away. I didn't. Couldn't. My body leaned into the magnetic pull that had been simmering all night. "Do you feel it too?" he asked softly, his words vibrating in the small space between us. I wanted to say no, to keep my defenses intact. But the truth trembled on my lips, heavy with the longing I could no longer disguise. My silence became its own admission. The lamp flickered slightly, the shadows shifting across his face, accentuating the intensity in his eyes. He wasn't the distant husband from weeks ago. He wasn't the careful man who always second-guessed his own reach. Tonight, he was raw, present, and unrelenting. "You drive me crazy," he murmured, his thumb brushing against my knuckles. "The thought of losing you, it terrifies me." The confession sliced through me. All the cracks in our relationship, all the hidden fears, surged to the surface. I felt tears sting, but I blinked them back, unwilling to let vulnerability ruin the fragile spell hanging between us. I drew in a shaky breath. And what if I'm already slipping away? His grip tightened, his face moving closer, so close that one tilt, one breath, one reckless decision would erase the space entirely. The tension was unbearable, the anticipation electric. Every inch of me screamed for release, for the distance to finally break. And just as his lips hovered near mine, just as the world seemed to vanish around us, a sound shattered the silence. The creak of footsteps in the hallway. We froze, our breaths colliding in the narrow space between us, our secret hanging in the air like a live wire. And in that moment, I realized, whatever was about to happen would change everything. The footsteps in the hallway grew louder, each creak of the wooden floorboards pulling us tighter into the fragile bubble of our secret moment. His hand gripped mine as if to anchor me, but my heart was already racing ahead, pounding with fear, desire, and the weight of everything unspoken. The door lingered half open, shadows shifting beyond it. Whoever it was, whoever might catch us like this, it didn't matter. What mattered was the truth pressing between us, burning too hot to ignore any longer. He leaned closer, his voice a trembling whisper. I can't keep pretending anymore. My breath hitched. Pretending what? His eyes locked onto mine, fierce and unyielding. That I'm okay watching you drift away. That I don't notice the way you smile at messages that aren't mine. That I haven't wondered if someone else already has your heart. The words cut through me, sharp as glass. The jealousy I'd felt earlier was now reflected back, magnified. I wanted to deny it, to soothe his doubts, but honesty surged forward before I could stop it. You're right, I whispered, the confession trembling on my lips. There was someone else. The air snapped between us like a string pulled too tight. His hands slipped from mine, his chest rising and falling as though the world had just tilted off balance. Who? His voice cracked, raw and desperate. I swallowed hard, tears stinging at the corner of my eyes. An old friend. It wasn't physical. But it was real. I needed to feel seen again. To feel wanted. And he made me feel that way. His jaw tightened, his eyes burning with a storm of pain and longing. For a moment, I thought he would pull away completely. But instead, he reached up, cupping my face with trembling hands. Then why are you here with me? His question was more plea than accusation. And in that suspended second, the truth I hadn't dared admit surfaced. Because despite everything, it's still you. It's always been you. I just wanted to know if you still saw me. The silence that followed was unbearable, charged with anger, relief, and something far more dangerous, desire. His lips hovered inches from mine, no longer hesitant, no longer playful. It was reckless now, risky, like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall would change everything. Just as his mouth brushed against mine, the door creaked wider. A voice called softly from the hallway, breaking the fragile spell. Is everything okay in there? We froze, breaths colliding, our secret burning in the air between us. The truth was out. The desire was undeniable. And yet, the world beyond that door waited, ready to turn everything upside down. The voice in the hallway lingered like a ghost, freezing us both in place. His hands dropped from my face, but the fire in his eyes didn't fade. Instead, it grew sharper, pierced through me with the weight of everything I had just confessed. The door creaked further, and the shadow pulled back. Whoever had spoken decided not to come in. The silence returned, but it was no longer charged with intimacy, it was heavy with consequence. He stood abruptly, the blanket falling from his lap. His chest rose and fell in jagged breaths, as though the walls of the room were too small to hold his anger, his grief, his desire all at once. You needed someone else to see you, he spat, his voice cracking. But I was here. I was always here. You just stopped looking at me. Tears blurred my vision. I stood too, my legs shaking. And you stopped fighting for me. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to feel invisible in my own marriage? The words tore from me like lightning, raw and unpolished. For a moment, neither of us moved. The distance between us was wider than it had ever been, even though we stood only steps apart. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. So what now? Do I just accept that you were halfway out the door? That I wasn't enough? My throat burned, but I forced myself to answer. No. You are enough. But only if you still want to be. Only if you can forgive me for needing what you stopped giving. The silence cracked then, not with distance, but with desperation. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands gripping my shoulders, shaking but not cruel. His eyes shone with anguish, but also with something I hadn't seen in months, the refusal to let go. You're mine, he said, his voice breaking. I don't care how far you drifted, I'm not losing you. And for the first time, I believed him. Not because of his jealousy, or even his anger, but because of the vulnerability pulsing in his voice. The man who had seemed so distant, so detached, was standing here stripped bare. I pressed my forehead to his, tears slipping free. Then fight for me. Not just tonight. Every day. His grip softened, his breath shuddering against my cheek. He nodded, slowly, as though making a vow not just to me but to himself. The storm between us hadn't vanished. The betrayal, the jealousy, the pain, they were still there. But in the middle of the wreckage, there was also something else, the beginning of repair. And as his lips brushed mine, tentative but real, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the start of something we both had nearly lost, and now had to decide whether to rebuild. The storm of words, confessions, and raw emotions left us both trembling, but as we stood there, forehead to forehead, breaths mingling, it felt like the walls around us softened. The distance that had stretched so wide between us was slowly closing, not with passion born of jealousy, but with something deeper, choice. His hands slid from my shoulders to my waist, no longer tense, no longer desperate, but gentle. The kind of touch that said I still choose you. My tears hadn't dried, but for the first time in months, they didn't feel like grief, they felt like release. I don't want to lose you, he whispered, his voice rough with everything he had held back for too long. You won't, I murmured, my fingers brushing along his jaw, tracing the stubble I'd once loved to tease him about. Not if we promise each other this, right here, right now, that we keep fighting. Even when it gets hard. His eyes closed briefly, and when he opened them, they glistened with a softness I hadn't seen in so long. Then it's you and me. Always. The words wrapped around me like a vow, fragile yet powerful. And when his lips finally met mine, it wasn't hurried, or reckless, or fueled by anger. It was steady, tender, filled with all the things we'd been afraid to say. A kiss that tasted like forgiveness and the promise of beginning again. The tension that had nearly broken us transformed into warmth, filling the room. The blankets slipped around us once more, not as a barrier but as a shelter. We sank onto the bed together, not to escape into silence, but to hold each other, really hold each other, as though this was the first night of a love we had nearly forgotten but were finally ready to reclaim. My heart no longer raced with fear or jealousy, but with certainty. The man who had been a stranger to me in the same house was once again my husband, my partner, my love. And in that moment, as we curled together under the amber light, I realized something simple yet powerful. Sometimes love isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking, and choosing to mend, stronger than before. The night ended not in betrayal or distance, but in quiet closeness. No grand speeches. No perfect fixes. Just us, rediscovering each other in the most honest way possible. And as I closed my eyes against his chest, I knew the story wasn't ending. It was just turning a page.